Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. One of my favorite episodes of the year, the best of year 2022. I'm so happy to be talking about this with you. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. I'm actually kind of relieved that this is happening because it means I don't have to think about it anymore.
No, it was definitely a lot of thought that goes into this. We both made top 50 lists. I think we'll probably focus the bulk of our attention on the top 25. And from there, we'll probably talk about some categories of, best song and, MVP of the year, yada, yada, yada. But obviously, the bulk of the time will be spent on the lists. And as per tradition, I will let you kind of do the honors, and I'll let you know if anything that you have on your list is on mine. Then we'll kind of go through mine. I'm going to say this once up front, just to put it out there. I don't want to repeat myself. If I do, I apologize in advance. This was by far the hardest of the three lists, in my opinion, that we had to make, going back to 2020 or 2021. This was really difficult for me, not because it was the meticulous nature of the way I ordered it or anything like that. I just found there to be a lot of good albums, but not many phenomenal albums. Whereas usually the list kind of writes itself, where I can kind of put things into tiers and juggle those tiers. Here, with the exception of maybe 8 or 10 albums, I think that you could throw them in a hat depending on mood, and they would all fall out a certain way. I mean, that's not to say that I didn't like album 12 more than album 40. I did, but for the most part, depending on mood, it really it varied for me a lot this year, and I found it very difficult.
I felt pretty much the same. I ended up with like what I would call the bottom 20, which is like pretty much 51 through 70, because I just felt like there were so many really good, like just, I don't know, really good, but so many good albums that I almost felt bad not including them. So I kind of gave them their own, like little just missed it honorable mention kind of section. Usually your like February playlist is kind of like the albums that just missed the cut, and that's kind of what that is for me. So I'll mention, if you have it on your list and I have it in that bottom zone, I'll say like, hey, that one was at 59 or whatever. I'll just mention that because I did actually keep track of that. And we'll both post our full top 50 list on the Metal Exchange's Facebook group. But we're only going to talk about our top 25 just so that we don't, blow too much hot air in one episode.
or record for 6 hours.
That as well. So, but yeah, I kind of felt the same way. I felt like it was just a lot of really, like above average albums, good to really good, but like the list of excellent albums was kind of short, and it wasn't, picking up number one wasn't as easy as last year was with Halloween either. So it'll be interesting. I'm curious to see how much overlap there's going to be. I imagine there'll be at least some.
And what's also interesting is, although we obviously talk about music on the podcast, and then we'll talk about music off the podcast, we don't talk about these lists. So this is the first time we're hearing this, and quite frankly, the first time that we're even talking about rankings or anything remotely close. So it will be definitely a surprise for both of us. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let me hear what you got.
Yeah, so my first three albums, that 25, 24, and 23, are all what I would consider disappointments, because they're very what I would consider high-end bands that I would have expected to be a lot closer to the top of the list. And I'll start with number 25. I have Blind Guardian's The God Machine. I saw this was at the top of a lot of people's lists. It's still a Blind Guardian album, so it's still a very good album. It didn't grab me as much as the last album, Beyond the Red Mirror, or even the orchestral album that they released in 2019. I thought it was a good album, even very good. I just thought there was stuff that I just enjoyed more, and it just never grabbed me as much as other Blind Guardian albums typically do.
It's not on my list. I thought it was a weird album, and much like the Megadeth album, I thought that half the album was really, really good, and there was like 4 or 5 songs on that Blind Guardian disc that I just absolutely loved, and then there were 4 or 5 tracks that I just didn't grab me at all, and I just couldn't justify putting it on the list because all 50 albums on my list, I kind of liked the whole thing, so I just gave it a little bit of a bump. But I will say that those 4 or 5 songs were absolutely fantastic. And if those are the ones that they play live, I can't wait to see them live again because they are a phenomenal live act. But I'm with you. It was a disappointing album. I listened to it a lot, so I gave it its fair chance, but it never clicked for me.
Yeah, and it's similar to what I said last year about Nightwish's Human Nature. I didn't hate it by any sense of the imagination, but when a band of that caliber is that far down the list, or in your case, not on the list at all, it's got to be considered disappointing.
For sure.
At 24, I had Amorphous' Halo album, which, again, I enjoyed it. I always enjoy Amorphous albums, but it just didn't hook me as much as some of the previous ones did. Still better than most things I listen to, but again, kind of lower on the list than I would have expected. Curious. I'm sure they were on your list. I'm just curious as to where.
9. I had it in my top 10. I thought it was just from the beginning to the end. I thought it was just a great listen, and we'll put them up there with an Epica or something like that. They are just the model of consistency, and this was no different. I thought it was really, really good. That being said, if you would have put the album out in 2021, I'm not sure that it would have been in the top 20. But I think that just speaks to the year as a whole. But I like the album a lot.
Yeah. Again, the other thing too is that I probably didn't get to listen to a lot of these albums as many times as I would have liked. So, maybe it would have grown on me. But I'm not going to try to focus too much on that. I mean, this is just how it all fell into place.
There's no right or wrong answers here.
Yeah.
What comes in at 23?
23, I have Soilworks, Overgivenhetten. I think I said that fairly close. I really I'm enjoying how some of the Night Flight Orchestra vibe is starting to creep into Soilworks albums. It's an album I enjoyed start to finish. It was again though, there just were other things that I ended up enjoying more. Maybe if I'd listened to it a few more times, but it was. I think if you had told me years ago that I had a Soilwork album in my top 25, Evergrey did not make my top 25, but they are in my top 50.
All right, that's progress.
Yeah, we're moving places, but I thought this was a solid album, and I enjoyed it.
I don't have it on my list, but I did enjoy the album. I thought that I agree with you. The Night Flight Orchestra elements were cool, and then they would contrast that with some of the heaviest stuff that they've done probably in 25 years. So it was a cool album. I did listen to it. I probably should have spent more time with it, but it's not on my list. Although I think the 3 or 4 times I listened to it, I did enjoy it. Yeah,
it's. I think the last time I listened to it, especially, it really hit.
Makes sense.
It made its way up the list, I think, towards the end. At 22, this was a band that you had brought to my attention, and we had mentioned them, months ago. This is a band called Vrilinia. They're from Montreal, Quebec. They're a symphonic power metal band. They had this was their first full-length album. It's called The Other World. I just really enjoyed this. It kind of harkened back to the old era of Nightwish. We talk about how, hey, if you don't like that Nightwish doesn't sound like old Nightwish, there's other bands that do. But I ended up going back to this album a number of times, and I really liked it a lot. And it's actually not even the only debut album that's going to be on this top 25 list, but I really dug this. Really good stuff, and the vocalist Ariane Martel is she does that really.
Rick's daughter.
What's that?
Rick's daughter.
Yes, Rick Martel's daughter. She didn't go follow the family business as a model. She decided to be a singer instead. It's a little, the production's a little rough around the edges, but I thought the musical content was really good, and I think they're definitely a band worth checking out.
Not on my list, but the second that I heard of them, I immediately thought of you, and I just said, like, you got to hear this. So I'm glad it made the list.
Yeah, good stuff. So next at number 21, I have Sabaton's Symphony, or not Symphony to End All Wars. That's the symphonic version of War to End All Wars. I didn't have this album as high, and then I went back and listened to it again, and I just really enjoyed it. Start to finish, I thought it was one of the better Sabaton albums in the last few. And, you know, I know how much you love the song Christmas Truce, which, you know, happens to be on this album. But I thought this was quite a good album, and probably higher than I would have thought that it would have been after the first time I listened to it. But a couple more listens, and it really kind of stuck with me.
The album on a whole didn't make my list, but you did mention a song that was in contention for Song of the Year. That song hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just thought the single was great. I thought the video was great. Loved it. The album itself, I'll go back to Primo Vittoria or Art of War, and I'll be very happy.
Sure. At number 20, I have another debut album, the UK band She-Wolf. It's another symphonic power metal band. This is just really my bread and butter. I love symphonic power metal, and I just tend to gravitate towards the female vocals more so than the male vocals for whatever reason. This is a little less, I think, little less orchestral than the Verlinia album. It's a little more just straightforward power metal. But this is a band I went back and listened to this album a number of times and just really enjoyed it. So I'm sure you recommended this to me as well. But this was
this was another one that I heard, and I immediately thought of you. For some reason, it never clicked for me, and I actually went back to this album. This came out much earlier in the year, but for some reason, I remember going back to this like in the beginning of November, and I enjoyed it more than I did when I first heard it. It was one of those things that I heard and I kind of passed on to you, and then I just didn't listen to it again. I enjoyed that November listen quite a bit more, but it just didn't crack my list. Not bad, just it wasn't for me, but good enough that I would certainly be interested in hearing another album from, if that makes sense. Like, sure. They're on the radar now. Yeah,
and again, it's their first album, so we'll see what comes up in the future, but I think this is definitely a promising start. At number 19, I had Jani Liimatainen's solo album, My Father's Son. The songwriting is just what we've come to expect from Jani as kind of a solo performer since he's left Sonata Arctica, but you have these really great guest vocalists in Bjorn Strid and Tony Kakko, Timo Kotipelto, Annette Olsen. You have Jens Johansson on the keys. Just a really cool album. I enjoyed it a lot, and whenever I went back to it, I was like, man, these songs just are super catchy. No surprise it's on Frontiers Records. Just a really solid solo album from Jani.
I had this on my list up until about December 25th. It was probably Christmas Day. It was one of the last two to get bumped. So you want to call it 51 or 52? That's what it is for me. It just missed the cut. I like this album a lot.
Yeah. Then, oddly enough, Jani's old band, I have Sonata Arctica at number 18, The Acoustic Adventures Volume 2.
Whoa. I was not expecting this at all.
I did not really care for Volume 1. I went back and listened to it after enjoying Volume 2 so much, and I don't know what it is, just the song selection, I guess. I just thought the Volume 2 just blew Volume 1 out of the water. It's some of my favorite Sonata Arctica songs, and they're done in a really just a really well done acoustic manner. I enjoyed the hell out of this. So yeah, I found myself going back and listening to this, and I had the volume 1 at the very bottom of my list of albums from the 2022. But this one, it's so odd because they were probably all recorded at the same time or whatever. It just was a matter of song selection at the end of the day.
I enjoyed it. I only listened to it once in full disclosure. I did not spend a lot of time with it. It was cool for what it was. I'm surprised it's that high, though. That's a very, very high spot for this kind of album, but I'm glad you liked it. That's great.
Yeah, I think me and Mike Johnson are probably the only people who have had it on their year-end list, but cheers to Mike. I enjoyed it, too. Another band that this is a debut album, another symphonic metal band, and again, one that you brought to my attention, Emmetropia from Sweden. They had an album called Equinox, and really basic cover art notwithstanding. Some of these songs were released on an earlier EP that they, I think, re-recorded for this album, but another female-fronted symphonic metal album that I really thought was quite good. This is, like I said, this is my brand, and I enjoyed this a lot, and I think the genre that you're going to see come up even more going forward is actually the frontier style melodic metal bands. I'm just getting warmed up.
Plenty of releases.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to listen to this album?
I did. And again, this was another one that I kind of passed on to you. This band had an EP that came out in 2018. They kind of reimagined, if you will, those 4 tracks, added another 4 or 5 tracks, and they kind of put it out as a full-length debut release. They were very good. If memory serves, they were very symphonic insofar as like a lot of orchestration in this stuff. If memory serves, again, I could be wrong. I didn't love it, but I knew you would. I understand why you gravitated towards it. I think the potential is there. I think the songwriting left me a little something to be desired, but the orchestration was cool.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Again, there's just a lot of cool new bands that I found out about this year, and those 3 especially kind of. There's 4, I think, debut albums of female-fronted symphonic bands, and we've already named 3 of them that are on this list.
I bet I can guess the last one.
I think you can too, and I'm going to get to it shortly, but I have a couple of melodic albums I want to talk about first. At number 16, I had Gathering of Kings' Enigmatic album. I've had a hard time like pulling up information on this because they're not a band that's in the Metal Archives website. I know that Masterplan vocalist Rick Altsey is a part of this. I know Bjorn Strid had been in the past. I don't know that he was actually on this album. And then there's I know the singer from Nocturnal Rites as well was on this, but there's just so much good like just melodic hard rock / metal out there, and this is a band now. I think this is their 3rd or 4th album, and every time they release an album, it's just really solid. And this was no different. I enjoyed this one quite a bit.
I didn't spend enough time with this one. I listened to it a couple of times, and when I say a couple, I literally mean I think I listened to it twice. It didn't grab me as fast as the first 2 albums did, which I loved. I was a big fan of both of those first 2. I think this is the 3rd. For some reason, this left me a little cold. It does not make it to my list. I don't even have it as an honorable mention. But because it's on your list, I'm going to go back to it because I feel like maybe I missed this one. Yeah.
There's a song called Feed You My Love, which I think was a cover. And it features, I'm blanking on his name, but the vocalist from Nocturnal Rites, and I recognized him right away. And it's just very catchy stuff. And following that up at number 15, Ronnie Atkins' second solo album, Make It Count. Again, like just, he's showing that, he can survive outside of Pretty Maids. His first solo album was really good, and I really enjoyed this one as well. Again, like really just solid melodic hard rock / metal, just catchy foot tapping kind of stuff. But I found myself going back to this one and enjoying it quite a bit.
I think that it seems, based on the statement from him, that Pretty Maids might be, dare I say, in his rearview mirror at this point. But the 2 solo albums were great. I have this at 45, so it does make my list. It's a little bit further down, but definitely enjoyable. Hearing him get to sing is an absolute pleasure. So I look forward to more stuff from him in the years to come. And to be honest with you, if memory serves, I might be talking about him a little bit later. But you know what? I won't even get it. I'll say this: Nordic Union, the other album he put out this year, is also on my list. It's a little bit higher though. It's not top 25, but it's number 37 as luck would have it.
There you go. At number 14 was my 4th debut album, and I think you kind of probably guessed what it was. It's the band Empress. No,
I thought it was going to be something else.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Progressive power symphonic. It's a really nice mix of genres, I think. The vocalist Barbara Blackthorne, who I'll just say I'm friends with on Facebook, so full disclosure, but I thought she did an excellent job. And this is an album I found myself going back to a number of times, and that's kind of why I had implored you to make sure you check them out when they play on 70,000 Tons, because I think that they could be one of the next big, I think, bands from the U.S., just a really, really solid debut album. I thought this was really good.
I agree with you. It is good, and I gave you my word I would check them out. But I think that I will inject a question here. Does Nocturna not make your list?
It's actually number 13.
Oh, get out of here. Okay.
Yeah, I guess I had 5 debut symphonic female-fronted
How
bands.
funny is that? Okay.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so that I thought this was another album, came out earlier in the year, really early. It came out in January. I went back and listened to this repeatedly. I listened to it again today, as a matter of fact. I just thought this was really good. I mean, what's better than a female-fronted metal, 2 female-fronted vocalists in one band? I just thought this was a really cool debut album, and trying to get some info on.
Well, let me interject for a second. I had this in my top 10 for a while, and as the year moved on, it kind of moved down a little bit, but it stayed in my top 25 because I thought it was a really, really good release, and for a debut, I thought it was just simply excellent. I have it at 21. One of the better albums in the genre this year, and that's why when you didn't say it, I was not surprised, because to me, I thought it was arguably the best of the bunch. And
yeah, so this is Frozen Crown guitarist Federico Mondelli, one of his, I guess, side projects. He's also on my list, further down the list, Volturian's Red Dragon album I had at 44. But he's definitely keeping himself busy, and I think Frozen Crown's going to have an album coming out this year. But this was very good. I enjoyed. Yeah,
this and the new Frozen Crown single was fantastic. They are a band that I think are one of those bands that could blow up with this new album, and this was no different. Both the Nocturna this year, the Frozen Crown next year. Very, very good stuff. So I'm with you. This is so far, this is the highest one you've had that's ranked very high on my list as well. Both the Amorphous, obviously, but the Nocturna, like I said, number 21 for me. Very good.
The rest of the list is pretty much mostly what I would consider household names. At number 12, I have Royal Hunt's Dystopia Part 2. Much like Part 1, the first time I listened to it, I just kind of shrugged, but the more I went back to it, the more I just really enjoyed it. It's just pretty classic Royal Hunt, but it has almost every vocalist that was ever in Royal Hunt on it, which makes it really interesting. Other than John West, I'm pretty sure every former Royal Hunt vocalist, Henrik Brockman, Mark Bowles, even Mats Levin is on this, and I don't think he ever was a Royal Hunt vocalist, but I love Mats Levin, so
welcome aboard.
Yeah, I just thought this was Royal Hunt is always, since DC's rejoined the band, I would venture to say that had I had a list every year, their album would be in my top 50 every year since DC rejoined the band.
I really struggled with this album. I found I don't find this to be a problem with other bands, one or two of which are on my list. But for some reason, I thought that having so many vocalists on here was a bit jarring to me, and I was not able to get over it. So as good as the songs were, this one never clicked for me, and I tried, and I wanted to like it. And I think I'm in the minority because I've actually seen this album on a lot of lists. So I think it's a me thing. It's me. It's not you. It's me. But I had to break up with Royal Hunt on this one. I couldn't get into it.
Yeah, if I remember, I don't think you loved the part one either.
I didn't. You're absolutely right. And this one, but I found this one to be just like particularly jarring. It wasn't the music. It was just, I didn't, there was like a lack of cohesiveness from track to track, from chorus to chorus even, and it threw me off.
Fair enough. At number 11, band you mentioned a little while ago, I have Nordic Union's Animalistic album. This was their third release. This is a side project of Ronnie Atkins and Eric Martinson of Eclipse, and it's just, the songs are just, man, the very first song, On This Day I Fight, it sucks you in right away, and the whole album just it rocks all the way through. I love this combo of just two of my favorite vocalists from two of my favorite melodic metal bands coming together, and it's kind of like a dream team. But I thought this album was really good, and clearly you did as well.
Yeah, this was great. I think that Martinson's songwriting is some of the best in the genre and has been for many, many years. I'm a huge Eclipse fan. I didn't have it, like I said, as high as you. I have it at 37, but I can understand why it almost cracked your top 10. This was a very good release.
All right, and so we make it into the top 10. We'll kick off with two bands from the UK. Number 10, I have Threshold's Dividing Lines. I think if this album came out earlier in the year, it might have made its way higher up, but it came out kind of late in mid-November. So I only listened to it a handful of times, but that said, it was still a highly enjoyable. I think this is the second album they've released with Glenn Morgan back in the fold as their vocalist, and I do have I have Arena on my list, way down at 54, with
nice.
Damian Wilson, not to be, left out. That was an album I enjoyed as well, but this Threshold's just on another level when it comes to prog metal bands for me. They're actually not the highest prog metal band on this list, which you shouldn't be too surprised when you see who is, but
I can venture a guess, but
this was a little bit easier, a little bit more digestible than the Shires album that preceded it, just because of the fact that it wasn't as long. Legends of the Shires was a 2-disc affair, and this was just kind of felt a little bit more compact at 64 minutes, but just, the songwriting for this band has just always remained so consistent, and this is no exception.
I heard this album for the first time, and I liked it. And I put it on a second time, and it just absolutely blew me away with the second listen. And then I think I listened to it every day for like a week. I just fell in love with this disc. It is in my top 10. It is number 2. I thought this album was amazing, and it was. I toyed with having it as number 1, and maybe it's a victim of coming out so late in the year. I just couldn't put it above my number 1, but I thought this album was fantastic. I've seen mixed reviews. I think some people love it, and other people might have thought it was a little bit weak. For me, it was every bit as good as everything else in their catalog, which is fantastic. Shires took me a little while to get into, and I think it might be their best album, which is crazy to say, but at least it's up there. I don't know that I like it as much, but it's close. I thought this album was really, really good. There's not a bad song on there, and one of the songs in particular might be my song of the year. So I'll leave that a little bit. I'll leave that for a little bit later.
Okay, I have two albums left on this list that I'm fairly certain are not going to be in your top 25 or possibly even in your top 50. And this next one is the first of those two. This one's Eden Bridge's Shangri-La. This was my favorite Eden Bridge album in years, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it just absolutely sucked me in every time I went back and listened to it. And then there's this just long ass ending 16-minute like epic several part track that features Eric Martinson again, and it's just wonderful. Hearing him on an Eden Bridge album was completely out of left field. But man, this is one of those bands. I know you told me when you saw them they weren't particularly great. Maybe they were having an off day. I've always wanted to see them live. Sabine Edelsbacher, ever since I first heard her doing guest vocals on early Power Quest material, I've just loved her voice. But I just enjoyed this a lot. I was rather surprised that it was that it stayed this far up my list, but I always enjoyed it when I went back to it. And shout outs to Carl Groom for mixing and mastering this one. So he gets two credits in a row.
I agree with you. This was not on my list. As I mentioned to you, in private, I saw Eden Bridge on 70,000 Tons of Metal back in 2020, and I just did not enjoy their live set. And I think as a result, it kind of made me stay away from this. I shouldn't say stay away. I didn't spend any time with this album. I listened to it once, and then I never listened to it again. I don't know that necessarily reflects a poor album insofar as some sort of inherent bias because I didn't like the live set. So that's a me thing as well. I can understand why you liked the album better than some of their prior material because I thought the mix was great. As you mentioned, I thought that some of the songs here were very good, but I didn't spend time with this, and that's why it didn't make my list.
Yeah, they feel like a band that like just nobody really talks about, and I've always just really enjoyed. And they've been around for like over 20 years, just consistently releasing albums, and I've always enjoyed them. At number 8, I have Dynasty's Final Advent album. I don't really know what else to say other than this band. I feel like they always come out with just really strong albums, and I always end up enjoying them. I think Nils Molin's vocals are fantastic. It's just the total package when it comes to that melodic metal style, and they're so good at it. I think they're up there with Eclipse when it comes to just knocking it out of the park. I just, again, found myself going back to this and just really bopping my head and tapping my foot every time I put it on.
I didn't listen to this a ton, but it was so catchy and I liked it a lot. And I feel like every time I put it on, it was one of those things where I said, I got to listen to this more. And then I just never did. But I liked it enough that it was number 12 for me because I feel like I didn't listen to it much, but when I did, I enjoyed the hell out of it. And it was just such an easy listen because you just kind of get into the moment. It's not too thought-provoking. You just enjoy it for what it is. I don't think it's as good as Renatus or that album that came out, 7 or 8 years ago now or whatever. I still think that was their magnum opus. I'll use the phrase. I thought that album was kind of the high watermark, and I don't know that they'll ever hit it, but they're getting close, and this was very good.
Very good. Yeah, I thought it was probably my favorite since that album, to be honest.
I agree with that.
At number 7, so now to me, like when this band comes in at number 7 and doesn't come in the top 3, it's a little bit disappointing. But it's Avantasia's Paranormal Evening with the Moonflower Society. I still think that Ghost Lights is the kind of the measuring stick for the later era Avantasia albums for me. But again, like, it's still an Avantasia album, and it's kind of like he's kind of sticking with this roster of singers with Jorn Land, Michael Kiske, Ronnie Atkins, Eric Martin, Jeff Tate, Bob Catley. And then you throw in a little bit of Floor Jansen and Ralph Sheepers for good measure. Just an outstanding lineup of vocalists. The songs are really catchy. It's just not one of my favorite Avantasia albums, but it's still good enough to be at number 7 for me.
I don't have this on my list. I'm at a loss for words. This should have been great. And I think that there was another album that came out this year with a whole slew of vocalists that I absolutely loved. But this one, I just felt like it was a little stale, and I don't quite know why, because obviously every one of these singers is fantastic and I love their work. But for some reason, this one didn't click. I probably should have spent more time with this one as well, but like I listened to this quite a bit and it just never, ever left an impression on me, so much so that it's not on the list at all. I have it as one of my biggest disappointments because I wanted to love it. I really did. It just never quite got there for me.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of felt that way that the first couple of listens. It took a little longer than you would think an Avantasia album should take, but it still stuck with me in the end, so that's why it's where it is. I think number 6 might surprise you a little bit, but every time I listen to this album, it moved a little bit further up, a little bit further up, a little bit further up, until it made it all the way up to number 6, and it could possibly be the catchiest album of the year. Kissin' Dynamite's Not the End of the Road.
Wow.
Absolutely love this album. It's just such a joy to listen to, and it's so fun. Yoko Ono, check out that track. No One Dies a Virgin. It's just to me, like, I don't know, like, to this, I think might have been my favorite melodic metal album of the year, depending on if you consider another band coming up in that genre. But I love this album. I thought I liked it even more than Dynasty or Nordic Union.
So interesting you say that. They were another band that was on 70,000 Tons back in 2020. And I dragged a number of people to go see them because I had to go see this band. I was and am a big fan. And don't let Tyler Skode fool you. I think he's a really, really big fan of the band now, even though he will probably go to his grave denying it. But kidding aside, as soon as that show was over, they kind of disbanded and they reformed with a new lineup. And I was very hesitant to hear what this album was going to sound like, but this was a grower for me as well. The first time I heard it, I did not like it, but every time I listened to it, I liked it a little bit more. It's at number 44 on my list, so it made the top 50. It's not nearly as high as it was for you, but I understand why you liked it. A lot of great rock anthems, another easy listen, and I'm just kind of happy that they're still going strong after the lineup change. The songwriting on this was fantastic. Not my favorite album by the band, but probably my second favorite album.
I feel like they would slay at Prague Power. I would love to see this. They were
so good live.
I would love to see this band
for what it is.
Come in.
Yeah.
They'll be making their way up my sponsor list. I will say that much. This album really opened my eyes. I really enjoyed it.
Nice.
So into the top 5 we go. There's still a Prague album or two left, believe it or not, and this is one of them. Seventh Wonder's The Testament. Seventh Wonder is just Seventh Wonder. Like I feel like they don't even have to try that hard, and they make an album that ends up in my top 5. This is the kind of prog metal that I absolutely love, and it's just I don't know that it's any better or worse than their last album. I just really liked it. So
this in my opinion was much better than their last album, and quite frankly, I would say it's better than their last 2. I thought this was their strongest album since Mercy Falls.
Wow.
I think that it was more cohesive. I thought the songwriting was a little bit tighter, not quite as meandering, I guess is the word I will use. I have it at number 10. I thought this was a really, really good release, and I think that if I played it more, it probably could drift a little bit higher. But I think that they are kind of like the forerunners for that modern melodic prog sound. And, you know, like I said, anyone that listens to Camelot, go listen to what real vocals sound like on Seventh Wonder. And I'll just say that.
Yeah, it's like I said to you before. Everyone else is like Camelot doesn't sound like old Camelot, and I'm like Camelot doesn't sound like Seventh Wonder.
Amen.
It's just
Amen.
Tommy's just unleashed with Seventh Wonder, where
That's
he's
it.
not so much with Camelot.
They take the seatbelt off on
But
this and they let
but
them.
even beyond that, just the songwriting is just so strong always with this band, and I think, like you said, I definitely think that high praise that you gave it, that it's their best album since Mercy Falls, is well deserved. At number 4, I have one more album that I guess is a prog album, if not prog adjacent, but it's Star One's Revel in Time. I had Arion on my list, I believe, last year, fairly, probably in the top 15 or top 20, I think, which I think is actually, again, disappointing. Like, an Arion album really should be top 3, top 5 at worst, same as Avantasia. This was just fantastic. Star One albums are just things that I look so forward to when they come out once every 8 or 10 years or whatever. This album just kicks off at like their first 2 albums did as well, with this just absolute banger of a track. But what those first 2 albums didn't have was Brittany effing Slays from Unleash the Archers. What a great choice to be on this album. She absolutely just brings it.
I thought you were going to say Slays.
Yeah, well, that would have just been a little bit too derivative. But unlike in the past, where these Star One albums have mostly been the Russell Allen, Damian Wilson show, there's more guest vocalists on here, like Roy Khan and Floor Jansen, which I think give it a little bit more flavor than the past albums, and make it feel a little bit more like an Arion album, where there's multiple vocalists instead of just 2. But the songs are they're all based on time travel, either movies or TV shows. So there's songs about Back to the Future and what have you. But you have Joe Lynn Turner's on one of the tracks. And then you also have, the awesome instrumentalists that are involved, Steve Vai, Jens Johansson, Michael Romeo, Timo Summers, Bumblefoot. There's just a lot of Jeff Scott Soto does a track on here. Siri wants to get involved as usual. Just really good. This one, are you kidding me? Be quiet. Probably my favorite Arin involved release in a while. I thought this was excellent.
I was so disappointed by the last Arion album. I was so disappointed because it had all the ingredients, but for some reason I feel like they didn't put them in the right proportion, and so the recipe was screwed up. And then I mentioned the Avantasia album, which just did not click for me for whatever reason. Thank God for this release. I'll tell you something. This was a 5 for me. So we both have this in our top 5. What I loved is not only was the first disc just an absolute great album, but then he's like, we're going to release the exact same album, but with completely different vocals, with different singers doing all the songs. And like, it was just an interesting take on the album I just heard. So I would listen to them back to back, and I would listen to the different way that, like, the different approaches that the singers took to the same songs. And I thought it was such a cool idea for a band like this to do something like that. I loved it. The whole package. I give it an A. Top 5. Great album.
All right, so we make it to the top 3, and no surprise, they're all power metal albums. I expect 2 of them will be in your top 25. I expect one of them will not sniff your top 25. At number 3, Stradivarius's Survive. This was my favorite Stradivarius album since Nemesis, which was my favorite Stradivarius album of the post Timo Tolkki era. Every song is great. It somehow, even without Timo Tolkki, the Stradivarius like ethos, I guess, if it's the best word I could come up with, is still there. Even though Timo Tolkki was Stradivarius for so long, but I guess having a Stradivarius fanboy help write the songs with Timo Kotipelto on vocals and Jens Johansson still on keyboard duty, it still feels like Stradivarius to me, and I thought that this was one of their best albums yet. Just a a really fantastic release. And it came out in September and just skyrocketed up the list and pretty much stayed there the rest of the year.
I'll make this short and sweet. I agree with you. Best album since Nemesis. Every song was catchy. Number 8 for me. Fantastic power metal album.
Very nice. My number 2 is the album I don't think it made your list or was even considered, but it's just one of my favorite bands, and I think they certainly.
Let me guess.
Go for it.
Battle Beast.
It is Battle Beast. Circus of Doom, I thought was such a more consistent album compared to No More Hollywood Endings, which I think had a lot of good songs, but just stylistically was kind of all over the place. And this, they kind of are gone back to the well. I thought that Bringer of Pain was such a strong album, even though it was after Anton had left the band to start Beast in Black. I feel like this is kind of going back to a little bit of that Anton kind of vibe. It feels a little bit like a Beast in Black derivative, even though they were the ones who did it first. But Nora continues to be one of my favorite vocalists these days, and I just thought that this was an album that every song was catchy, and it's just fun, and it's just my style of music that I enjoy. So I think Beast in Black, was my number 2 or 3 album last year, and now Battle Beast is my number 2 album this year. So I feel like for whoever was disappointed about Anton leaving Battle Beast, I feel like now we have 2 really great Beast bands, and I enjoy the hell out of both. And with the vocalist couldn't be more different between the two, but I love them both. So this was number 2 for me.
You are right. This is definitely not in my top 50, but I'll say this. It wasn't terribly far off. I have it in that honorable mention category. I have it on my playlist for next month because it just missed the cut. I would probably put it at 60 or 62 or something like that. Dare I say, my favorite Battle Beast album. I'm not really a fan of this band. The sound has never clicked for me. I did not enjoy the last album at all, but I did appreciate this album, and I kind of liked it. And there was stuff I liked more, and that's a personal taste thing, but I can't even criticize you for having it high because I recognize this was a very good album for what it was.
Very nice. And I guessing you could figure out what my number 1 album is.
Yeah.
It's Dragonlance Power of the Night Star. Pretty much Battle Beast was my number 1 for pretty much the whole year. It was between that and Stradivarius. Star One was up there. Seventh Wonder kind of snuck in towards the end. Kiss and Dynamite rose up the list pretty quickly towards the end. But this came out in October, and again, part of it was because we covered it on the podcast. I listened to it a lot. But I went back and listened to it again a couple of days ago just to make sure that I felt confident making this number 1. And I've heard people that didn't like it, which I was shocked by, frankly, because I don't feel that this was anything out of the ordinary for this band based on previous releases. We used the word dense a lot when we talked about it, but when it finally broke through that density layer for me, I couldn't get enough of it, and I couldn't. Nothing got past it for me for the rest of the year. So yeah, this was number 1 for me, and honestly, even before it came out, I was kind of expecting it to be. I felt like if it wasn't in my top 3, it would have been a disappointment, but it didn't disappoint, and this was number 1 for me.
The Stradivarius, as I said, was I thought a phenomenal listen from top to bottom, and that's why I had it so high. But it wasn't my power metal album of the year. This was, and I think the reason it was so good was it was everything I wanted in a Dragonland album, but just it didn't disappoint. I had high expectations after the long delay, and it just met all those expectations. And even though I think that the Stradivarius album was great, I thought it was a little safe. In the sense that what they did perfectly, but it was just, they didn't really push the envelope. It was just a very, very, very solid album. Whereas here, I thought they actually pushed the envelope in a number of different ways, and for that reason, but still maintaining that core sound that they have had for now decades. Number 4 for me, really, really good disc. And I'm glad we covered it because it just gave me an excuse to listen to it nonstop. But having gone back to it, it's just as good as I remember it a couple of months ago. So I'm with you 100%.
Now, I want to just close out my list by saying this. I don't remember the exact score I gave it. I want to say it was either an 8.5 or an 8.75. But just as a point of reference, that was the kind of year it was for me where there wasn't really anything that kind of got into that 9 to 10 area. Maybe with time, how certain things, the nostalgia factor kicks in, but that I just want to kind of point out that for whatever reason, it just kind of worked out that last year, or the year before, I should say, we also did a long form cover of the album that I ended up ranking number 1, and you did as well, which was Helloween's self-titled album, which I gave a 9.5. So that kind of shows you the difference in what I think the overall quality of albums were this year. But again, I agree with you that ranking them was the hardest part because there were so many albums that probably from 70 to 20 for me were all in that 7 to 7.5 kind of range. And like you said, depending on what you were in the mood for, I could have listened to Arch Enemy or Megadeth or Poets of the Fall, depending on my mood. I'll mention, if you have any of these bands that were outside of my top 25, I'll mention them and I'll post the list. We'll post both our lists, probably this weekend at some point, but which by the time you listen to this will have already happened. So you'll be able to see the list. It's online now. But that's kind of my little wrap up for my year. I just thought it was very difficult to order things, but I did my best. I'm going to try to listen to the albums more times this year. I'm going to be a little bit more diligent about, not trying to rank things I've only heard 2 or 3 times. So
as tough as it is with the volume that comes out each year.
Because I think that an album like the Amorphous album may have ranked higher if I had listened to it more and let it sink in more. But it is what it is, and there's only so much time you have, and whatever. It's not my primary job, so I can't feel too bad about it. But just a ton of really good stuff, and I will say, thanks to you, I never in my life would have thought I'd been able to make a list where not just 25, not just 50, but I have a list of 70 albums this year that I ranked. I mean, because
that's just what's ranked. That's not necessarily what you listen to. Right?
Yeah, I deleted a number of albums off the list that just didn't make the list, and that some of them might get mentioned when we start talking about some of the other categories as far as disappointments go. But
they just couldn't cut the mustard.
Yeah, just like Hulk Hogan once accused X-Pac of not being able to do. There was a lot of stuff that I wanted to mention, and that's why I kept them on the list, and that's why I'll release that full list at a certain point in time. Maybe I'll even make a playlist much like yours, but that's kind of my little wrap up, and I'm really excited to hear about your list.
All right, let's get to this momentarily. All right, so as we kind of go through this, I'll do my top 25, many of which you've actually talked about. I think we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had 8 out of my top 25. So right off the bat, quite a bit of overlap. I just want to mention a few albums that kind of were in the 26 to 50 category, but I feel like for one reason or another, they are just kind of worth mentioning, or I'll drop a line about a few of these because, well, the floor is mine and that's what I want to do. So that's what I'm going to do. One album that came in at number 49 was an album called Gladdenfold, and it's like this folky power metal mixed with melodic death metal. Really, really interesting sound, really, really different. I know some of the guys over on the MSR cast were talking about it. I think this album is fantastic. I actually something that I still listen to on a regular basis. Well worth checking out. Another one, which
I didn't hear that one. I'm gonna have to check that one out.
I think you'll love that album, and I'd love to hear your thoughts next week if you can give it a listen before we record next week.
Just remind me, because
no problem.
My memory's not what it once was.
I can understand that completely. So gladdenful, but I'll definitely make sure that you hear that. Another one that I wanted to mention, and again, I'm just kind of going through the list. Gaerea, Gaerea, and the album is called Mirage. This album is by far the heaviest album on the list. It is just pure, raw, like unadulterated emotion. And I listened to this thing a ton. And every time I listened to it, I heard new things. Not accessible. Dare I say, the darkest, blackest, deathiest thing that's on my list, with the exception of maybe one other one, but really, really cool. The band is coming to the States later this year, and I actually would love to see them live. I think they're phenomenal.
I cannot believe in the same podcast we have mentioned former tag team partners Rick Martel and Tony Garea in the same episode. What an unbelievable coincidence.
Well done. I love it. Another album, which
that's another one I haven't heard yet either. So
I want you to listen just because I feel like I'm just curious, but that we won't talk about that.
Yeah. I always look forward to when you come out with your playlist, which you would do even before we had the podcast. So it'll give me a taste.
You'll get a taste for some of it.
Some of the stuff that I missed.
I was a little surprised that you didn't have two bands. Number 42, I have Eternal Ascent, which I thought was just a really good power metal album. And number 40.
I'll just say it just missed. It was at 26 for me.
I thought you were going to have it in yours, so it really did just miss. And another one I thought you might have was Fallen Sanctuary, with the singer from Serenities, George.
Yeah, I had that at 36.
Okay. Another surprise for me was number 38, the new Coheed and Cambria. This album was amazing, and I couldn't believe it because I kind of disregarded the band after the last few releases. Really, really good album. So high that it's in my top 40.
I think Tyler will be happy to hear that. He's a big fan.
Definitely a surprise. And then the other one, Brymere, Voices in the Sky, which was almost like Children of Bodom with that that power metal sound, but they have the darker vocals. Really, really underrated band and a very, very solid effort.
I enjoyed that disc quite a bit. I had that at number 52.
Oh, nice. Very nice. So just wanted to mention that one. And then the last one I wanted to just kind of give a mention to was number 26. And this is Quain's The Great Below. This was my black metal album of the year. Phenomenal production. And I saw this on a lot of other people's top 25 lists or top 10 lists or top 20 lists or what have you. I totally understand why. I thought this album was great. It was in my top 25 for a long, long time. And if you get me in the right mood, it probably goes right back into the number 12 spot. But when I finalized the list, I was listening to more mainstream or quote unquote mainstream stuff. So it just missed the cut at 26.
Non-black metal.
Yes, exactly. So with that backdrop, let's get into it. At number 25, I had another album, which I'm kind of surprised you didn't have just because it's flower power metal, and that's Fellowship's The Saberlight Chronicles.
I had it at number 50. I listened to it a couple of times and I liked it a lot. But there were just so many other albums that I just liked a touch more.
Okay.
Even that band Perpetual Fire, I think they're from South America. I forgot which country. I had them one slot even ahead of Fellowship. I know that was high on a lot of people's lists and I liked it a lot. And maybe if I had listened to it more, it would have resonated. It was definitely on my radar. It just didn't rank as high as I thought it might have.
This UK band is, many people are already heralding them as like kind of the next great thing in power metal, as this was a debut album for them.
I definitely got Twilight Force vibes.
100%. And I would slow the roll there a little bit. I'm not ready to crown them as the new wave of power metal, but this was a really good debut album, and I can understand why it got high praise. It just, I'm not ready to crown them as like the next Halloween or anything like that. Let's see what they do next.
Sure, fair enough.
Number 24, I have Devin Townsend's Lightwork. This album was part of the reason it made the list is because I just played it so much. Really, really interesting between the first disc, which is kind of atmospheric and a very liberal use of keyboards and other electronic instruments and whatnot, and then the second disc, which was almost Strapping Young Lad, and how heavy some of those songs were on the second disc, although it's technically a bonus disc. I like this album a lot. I feel like this is another album that has room for growth just because it is so dense. But I listened to it a ton when it came out, and I listened to it again last week. I just, for some reason, I kept going back to it because I knew that every time I would listen, I would hear something new, and that's kind of what excited me.
Oddly enough, I have them right next to Fellowship on my list also at number... I had them at number 51. I think I would have ranked it higher if I waited until the end of the year to listen to it. And oddly enough, I enjoyed the first disc more than the second disc. I kind of like the more chill Devin. It's super catchy to me. I liked it a lot. I think, but I think it was too dense to only listen to a handful of times, and that's what I ended up doing. It
was an album you needed to have kind of marinate and grow, and if you didn't spend the time with it, I'm not surprised that it wasn't higher, but it's something you may want to go back to, and quite frankly, I very much look forward to seeing him live because I think that some of this stuff will just absolutely be fantastic in a live setting. So I look forward to that. Number 23, an album that you mentioned briefly earlier, and that's Evergrey's A Heartless Portrait. They have been consistently putting out good albums, especially the last three. Very, very good. The only reason this is not higher on my list is it just sounds very similar to the last two albums that they put out, which were, again, both very good. I will always say that In Search of Truth is their best album, and this does not sound like that. But at the same time, they lost me for a little bit around the 2005 when they were kind of putting out albums that were just, I don't know, I thought a little bit flat, but it's nice to have them back. And you must have liked it if it even was on your top 50 list at some point.
Yes, I had it at number 48. I feel like each album they come out with, there's more crunchy tracks and less kind of mid-tempo, kind of sleepy tracks. And this one, I feel like this was like their most up-tempo album yet. I don't think there were any songs that I thought were like boring or uninteresting. I just liked it a lot.
Nice. Listen, I was very respectable if it's in the top 50. We have not covered them on the podcast, so I feel like 2023 might be the year.
Saturday Morning Apocalypse. Let's do it.
I like it. At number 22, I have the Halo Effect, Days of the Lost. This album was a debut, but from a number of seasoned musicians, all of whom had been in Flames. I just thought the songwriting was really, really tight on this one. I think that it's one of those melodic death metal albums that I kept going back to, and I just thought that you could tell that they were like the consummate pros. I will definitely be checking out their set in Atlanta. I think that it's going to be really, really good. I suspect that they'll play most, if not all, of this album and probably a couple of In Flames tracks, and that is good enough for me.
I had them at number 67.
Okay.
It was an album I enjoyed every time I listened to it. It's just not quite my sort of thing, I guess, but I still happen to like it. And I'm definitely planning on checking them out at Prog Power as well, just because I think that the album was really strong, and I think that the songwriting kind of really carries it to the point where I don't mind that the vocals are a little bit on the harsher side. But I've seen this pretty high on a lot of people's lists, and I totally understand why.
Perfect. I talked about Nocturna, so we jumped to number 20, which is another Canadian band, and this is Borealis with their new album, Illusions. The Evergrey worship is still strong, but at this point they may be doing it better than Evergrey because I have them higher on my list. The reason being is not only do they do the whole Evergrey worship thing, but they've kind of morphed into their own or forged their own sound. really, really good. I feel like their songwriting has gotten better over time, and I can see the slow evolution of this band, a band that like nobody was talking about 10 years ago, and now they're releasing, at least for me, albums that were, up in my top 20. Very, very good stuff.
I had it at 64.
Okay.
Just another really enjoyable album, but kind of fell into that kind of bottom mix of really enjoyable albums that I listened to last year.
Very good, very good. And then we go to number 19, which is another Canadian band. And this is a band that I'm not even sure that you're familiar with, but the band is called Osiren. The album is called Momentous. And this was a huge surprise for me. This is a Canadian band that basically outdid Queensryche at their own game this year. And I thought that the new Queensryche album was quite good. I think it was a little too long. I think that you could have probably taken 3 or 4 tracks off of it and actually made it a better album. But the Osiren album from beginning to end was fantastic. And it has a little bit of everything here. It has the Queensryche. It has a touch of power metal, a touch of like Jag Panzerist traditional metal. There's a lot going on here, but it's really, really, really well done. And I feel like they're not being talked about enough. That's not why I have them on the list, but it made it to number 19, and yet I'm not hearing anybody talk about these guys.
I think I heard 1 or 2 songs from this album, but I didn't
definitely
listen
sent you one song. I know
Yeah.
for a fact because
I didn't listen to the whole thing though, so I remember liking what I heard. That's all.
You'll hear it again on my playlist. So that's number 19. Number 18 was another kind of surprise for me. This is a band that's been around for a long time, and it's a band that actually played Prog Power back one of the few years that I just could not attend the festival, and this was Prog Power 9. The band is Spheric Universe Experience out of France. The album is called Back Home, and I always liked this band, but I wouldn't say I never loved them. I just, it was one of those bands I would listen to, I appreciated, and then I would kind of move on to something else. But this new album, they hit the nail on the head with this one. And it's the way I would describe it is kind of quirky modern prog, but with a nod to the old school in that you kind of hear like the Dream Theater vibes here and there, but it doesn't permeate the entire disc. It keeps it fresh. And the keyboards on this album were just absolutely fantastic and well worth checking out if you've never heard them.
I think I listened to this album like once, and it was fine. I didn't listen to it enough for it to crack the list, but I definitely listened to it.
Makes sense. Number 17 is another album which was a surprise to me that you didn't have, and that's Mantric Momentum's Trial by Fire. And the reason I'm surprised is you basically take Pyramaze or Pyramaze, you add Divided Multitude, and what do you get? A top 20 album that just clicked with me right away. It got better with every listen, and I don't think it was as good as the newest Pyramaze album, which was a top 3 album the year that it came out, but it was really, really good and really enjoyable. And I know Brian Clough is probably mad that this is not in my top 3, but I do. The fact is, it's at number 17, and that's very, very good.
Yeah, I had it at number 35. I liked it a lot, but it, again, just kind of lost in the shuffle of 7.5s.
I completely understand. I 35 is still very, very good. And like I said, you could listen to it tomorrow and it could be at 22. I think it's all kind of in that same range.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite vocals of the year. I will say that.
No doubt about that. Number 16, an album that you briefly mentioned earlier, and that's Poets of the Fall, their new album, Ghostlight. What can I say about this album or this band? They just put a smile on my face. They don't sound like anyone else, and that's probably why I like them as much as I do. They should be a massive international success, and it is a shame that they are not more popular than they are. And I mean, they have a good following, but they should be superstars, and this album was no different. I just thought that perfect production, that alt-rock / metal sound, and one of the best vocalists in the genre. It was the perfect change of pace disc for me, and I didn't even play it that much, but every time I put it on, it would just put a smile on my face.
I couldn't have put anything you just said better. They just missed my top 25. I had them at 27, but it's always they're they've only been on my radar, I think, for their last two releases, and I've enjoyed both of them very much. At least their last two full length studio albums, not counting the live stuff. This band's definitely been one of my favorites since I've become aware of them. Just mostly because of just how different it is from everything else, and I think that's really helps make it stand out. But I thought this album was very good.
There are times where I will go back and listen to them, and I actually have difficulty deciding which album to put on because you can't go wrong with any of them. I don't know that any of their albums are 9s or 9.5s, but I feel like every album is in like that 7.5 to 7.75, maybe an 8 range, and it's just they're all consistently good, and this was no exception. Very, very good stuff. Now we get into my top 15 with probably the best album in a genre which was surprisingly really, really good for me this year. And the genre is Doom. I thought there were a ton of very good Doom albums, the new Candlemass, and a lot of Doom death bands where they would have kind of like the growling vocals over the top of the Doom metal. For somebody who's always been very picky in that genre, I listened to a lot of it this year. I don't know that it's to the point where it's going to just permeate my top 50, but I wanted to represent them high because just as a genre, it did very, very well this year. But I put at number 15, Doomocracy. The album is called Unorthodox, and this was probably like my favorite album in the genre. And basically, this is the Greek version of Candlemass. Just really, really solid Doom. Clean vocals, and what separated this from some of the other stuff is just that the album had a lot of hooks, and so it was just easier to listen to than some of the other stuff, even though I listened to a ton in this genre.
Yeah, I saw that you and a few others had mentioned it late in the year. I didn't get a chance to check it out, though, so I'm looking forward to hearing it on your playlist.
Cool. Number 14, another prog album, the band with their second release called The Sentinel. The album, or should say the artist, was All Things Fallen. This is the kind of prog that I feel like you would probably enjoy in the sense that it's excellent production, heavy on the keyboards, cool songwriting, and just the overall feel of this album I thought was even slightly better than the debut. This doesn't seem to be a full-time band. I think it had been a solid 4 or 5 years since their last album. And I just feel like if they were to put more time and energy into being a full-time band, they could blow up like a Haken or something like that. But for whatever reason, it seems to be a side gig or a secondary project. But I thought the album was really good, and it kind of caught me right away.
I had a chance to, I think, listen to this once or twice. It didn't really grab me. It was fine. But probably something I should probably go back and listen to again.
I'm curious as to my number 13, which was a band that I talked about a ton last year. What did you think of Terra Maze's Flight of the Wounded? Because this came in at number 13 for me, and I thought it was just, again, a band that is on fire. It was, they were my MVPs of last year. They put out 2 phenomenal albums. And I just remember listening to this quite a bit, and every time I listened to it, I liked it a little more, and it just made its way up the list. Phenomenal, phenomenal stuff. They're on fire right now.
I had them on my list at 57, and I think only because I completely didn't realize that the album came out until like early December, I think.
Wow.
And I listened to it and I liked it a lot, but I just didn't get a chance to really marinate with me. But like I always just find myself always really enjoying. So even with like a limited listen, they still ended up on the list. So, but yeah, they always are just releasing consistently good stuff, and this was no exception. And I think probably would have ranked higher for me had I realized that it came out when it did.
Yeah. Again, I think your brand of prog. So I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you got to at least listen to it. For my number 11 album, I'll read my notes and then I'll kind of talk about the band. Quote, arguably their most complete album and my favorite since their debut. I can't wait to see them at Prague Power. Unfortunately, they are no longer playing. The band is Shaman. The album is Rescue. This album was really, really good. And even though I think it's very hard to step into the shoes of Andre Matos, and when I say very hard, I mean impossible, I thought that this album was phenomenal. And I just thought that because I liked it so much, they'd be a fantastic addition, even if it wasn't Andre gracing the stage in Atlanta. But that has come and gone, and unfortunately will not be a thing next year. So, or I should say this year. So it is what it is. But I thought the album is still very, very good. It's one of those albums that I listened to a lot earlier on when it came out. I didn't listen to it as much later on, but it still stayed high because of my fond memories for it.
Yeah, I liked it too. I had it at 41. I share your sentiment that it's disappointing that they're not playing at Prague Power, but it is what it is. But yeah, it sounds like they're not really even a band anymore at this point. But if that's their last album, it was a good. They
went out on a high note.
Yep.
Yeah. It is what it is, like you said. And now, we talked about some of the albums we had in common. It brings me to number 7. This album blew me away, and we're getting into the point where we're getting to the tier of albums which really separated themselves from the pack. I think my top 10 really did separate itself from like 11 to 50, if you will. But number 7, the band is called Zayon. The album is called The Lethean. And this is just symphonic death metal at its absolute finest. This was the extreme, quote unquote, metal album of the year. It blew me away the second I heard it. It stayed in heavy rotation throughout the entire year. Every single time I heard this album, I was picking up on things I didn't hear the last time. Some of the catchiest songs in a genre that you would never think is going to be catchy, because quite frankly, it was just so heavy in spots, but they mix it up between like the heavy death metal and then like these melodic sections, which you can actually gravitate towards. Really, really, really good stuff. If you've not heard this album, I give it my highest praise. You definitely have to check it out.
I had it at number 66, and it was surprisingly better than I thought it would be.
66 for this album for you, I feel like is a triple. Like, that's really good.
Yeah, I just thought that for like once you get beyond the harsh vocals, the music is just it's this really great combination of symphonic but like heavy music, and it just was a really cool marriage, I thought, and it resonated with me for sure.
I feel like the Epica fan in you probably made this more palatable than it otherwise might have been.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. I felt that's why I left it on the list, because I thought it was worth mentioning.
Nice. I'm happy it made it. We get to number 6. Number 6. I had no business liking this album as much as I did, but I played it and I played it and I played it. I don't even know if it's a metal album. I'm not really sure what it was. And to this day, having listened to the album a bunch, I don't know what the hell you call it. But all I can say is it was catchy, it was quirky, and I'm almost embarrassed to say how much I absolutely enjoyed this disc. But the band is Electric Callboy. The album is called Techno. Holy smokes! What is this? It's like German synth pop. I don't even know what you call it, but like it was. I mean, if you've never heard it, I'm not even sure how you describe it. But it was intoxicating to me how good this album sounded, and I just kept listening to it over and over again. And then I would not tell anyone, and then I'd go back and listen to it again. That was Electric Callboy for me.
I think I listened to the album once, and I think I just was like, you know what, I'm just going to make my life easier and take this out of the running, just because there's enough stuff I need to listen to. It was just so like so offbeat. And it was very enjoyable, but I just I decided to just not even put it in contention, just to make things a little bit easier on myself, but definitely see the appeal. It's a lot of fun.
It's catchy. I'll leave it at that. Number three, my number three album for the year was right behind Threshold in terms of an album that, well, let me say it this way. When I first heard this album, I liked it. And then for whatever reason, I didn't play it again. But then when I revisited it, I couldn't put it down. And this is kind of a super group in a number of ways. The band and album is called Philosophobia. It features Christopher Gildenlow on bass, Alex Landenberg on drums, and Dominic, I will not say the last name, but a Greek last name. This was the singer from a band called Wastefall, who I adored 20 years ago. So it was a bit of a super group, and this album was catchy as hell. Damian Wilson makes a guest appearance on one of these tracks. It's just something about this debut album it hit all the right notes, so to speak. And I didn't think it was too technical, but at the same time, I thought it was just beautiful songwriting, and it was one of those albums that I kind of overlooked, but I'm so happy that I went back to it because it wound up being, as high as it was on my list. Did you check this one out?
I didn't even know about it, honestly, so
okay.
I'll have to give it a listen.
And then I guess that brings us to number two was Threshold, and then the number one album on my list. Where do I start? I first heard this album in December of 2021, and it kind of set like a high watermark for me. And all year I was looking for something to kind of dethrone this particular album, and nothing did it. Even the Threshold, which I loved, just didn't eclipse Dawn of Solace's most recent album. And the album is called Flames of Perdition. I don't even know that this album would be number one for anyone but me, but it just struck all the right notes for me. It was very melancholy, very gray, but very the production with the way that the guitar tone just kind of resonated with me. The lyrics, it just. Maybe it was more of a microcosm of the year in general, but I went back to this album more than any other. I played it countless times. I would not listen to it for 2 months. I'd go back to it. I'd be like, you know what? This is still the album of the year. And that must have happened 4 or 5 times, where I would just go back to this thing after some sort of a break. And I just loved it. And then the irony is, when you take a look at Thomas Sakinen's other band, Wolfheart, they didn't make the top 50, but it easily could have, because he put out another album with his main band, which was one of the better melodic death metal albums of the year. But for some reason, Dawn of Solace just spoke to me like no other, and it basically remained my number one album for 13 months.
That's really very well stated. I did listen to it. It was just kind of that. Just a little bit
too for you.
Yeah, it was a little just too dreary. I gave it a couple listens, and it just didn't click with me. But that's cool that we have such very different albums at number one.
Yeah, I couldn't. And I understand why you have the Dragonland there. Obviously, mine, it's up there for me as well. But I just kept going back to this album, and like. Now that I'm talking about it again, I want to go listen to it. So I guess I have it in the right spot. But yep, that's my list in a nutshell. I look forward to posting it. There's a number of albums that I did like that I did not discuss, but I don't want to get into all of them right now just because we'll be here all night. But let's talk a little bit about some of the other categories. One in particular, Song of the Year. Did anything jump out to you as like far and away the Song of the Year?
Not really, but I have a pick because it's potentially the last year I'm ever going to be able to say that this band is my Song of the Year. So, Power Quest's Now Is the Time. It's the one song they released in 2022. And it's just, it's Power Quest. I love it. So
I have it as my best non-album single. So
Yeah,
it's on
well,
my list
that'll
as
be
well.
that for me as well.
Well, I figured, yeah, it's very, very good. A shame, but at the same time, happy that we got to hear one more tune at the very least. Another category I have here is best debut album: The Philosophophobia, The Fellowship, The Halo Effect, all of which I mentioned earlier. I'm assuming the best debut album would come right from your top list that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to have so many debut albums in the top 25, but yeah, Nocturna was the highest one, just ahead of Empress. But Emmetropia and She-Wolf and Verlinia all worth mentioning as well. That they were all in my top 25, and all female fronted as well. So a lot of good stuff coming from that area.
Talk to me a little bit about some of your biggest disappointments, because I have a handful and probably far too many to talk about, but I'll mention a few of them momentarily.
Yeah, I have 3 power metal albums right off the top of my head that were disappointing to me. First off being Ailstorm's release from this year, and I just want to pull it up so I could at least say the name of the damn album. But after absolutely loving, which we definitely disagreed on, but after absolutely loving Curse of the Crystal Coconut, I thought it was, for whatever reason, it just hit all the right notes for me. I think it might have been in my top. I don't know if it was my number one album that year, but it was in my top 3. I mean, I liked it that much. This follow up, Seventh Rum of a Seventh Rum, is like the half-assed version of the last album, where like there's a couple of like good old fashioned Ailstorm tunes, but overall it just was so derivative. And to say that a band that already is a derivative band released a derivative album is not a good thing. For it to fall from like the last album being in my top 3 to the next album not even being in my top 70. And granted, some of the issues with the band probably permeated that a little bit, but I just think, looking at this solely music wise, I just don't think it was nearly as good of an album as the previous one. So that was a disappointment for me. I also really was disappointed with Victorious's release. I feel like they've gotten too goofy for their own good. I enjoyed Space Ninjas from Hell. I think it was on at least in my top 50 2 years ago. But Dinosaur Warfare Part 2, man, they just lost me on this one, man. It was just, the music is catchy and it's good and everything, but the content is so ridiculous. I think I even had it underneath Ailstorm, for Christ's sake. Like, it was just so, I don't know, it just did not hit for me. And then the third band was Trick or Treat, who I usually really like. I didn't think the album was bad. It was just kind of run of the mill, and it didn't really make it onto the list. I don't know that I would call that a huge disappointment, but the fact that it didn't even make the top 70, I guess, would be considered a disappointment. And I guess just to circle back, just Blind Guardian only coming in at 25, I guess, could be considered somewhat disappointing as well.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of those. I'll just add a couple. I thought the newest Behemoth album, which I had high expectations for, really missed the mark for me. It doesn't appear on my list. It had a couple of very good tracks, but for the most part, I thought it was kind of a snoozer. I thought the new Hardcore Superstar was pretty terrible. I think it had 1 or 2 tracks that I liked. The rest of it I could take or leave. Kind of goes back to what we talked about of, having like kind of their best of. I don't know if any of the tracks on this album would have even made my best of. That's how weak I thought the material was. And then lastly, and this is a bit of a surprise because I'll talk about them in a bit, I thought the new Porcupine Tree album was very weak, and I wanted to like it, and I listened to it a bunch. It was much better live, but on the album itself, I just didn't think it was that great. And I know I am in the minority there. I know other people that have this very, very high up on their lists, but I expected more. after a 10-year hiatus, and it just didn't grab me.
Yeah, I thought it was just fine. It didn't make my list either.
Yeah.
But I guess that would be kind of considered disappointing. Where did you have, if at all, the who's the band that did the Dark Third? I'm blanking on the name.
Oh, Pure Reason Revolution.
Yeah, were they on your list?
Not disappointing. It just not on my list. I thought the album was better than I thought it was better than the Porcupine Tree album, but I listened to it a ton because I just think that the Dark Third is a top 2 album for me of all time, or a top 3 album. It just didn't grab me. It was fine. I listened to it a lot. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not going to make any year-end list. But it wasn't disappointing. It was fine. It was just like another release, and I'll look forward to the next one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have to say, like, as somebody who's known you a long time, I would consider that Porcupine Tree and what's their name again?
Pure Reason Revolution.
Pure Reason Revolution not
Easy
being in your top 25 in a year that they released albums is a little bit surprising, honestly.
I'll say this about Pure Reason. The Dark Third is such a good album that I don't think that they've come close to that album since. Even their last album, which I liked quite a bit, I think it was only in the top 25. Like, it was not a top 3 album for me, just because that's like a generational album for me. So, but I can't even say I'm disappointed. And Porcupine Tree, I love a lot of their work, but the reason that was a real big disappointment was because it was their comeback album, and then they just, for me, laid an egg. But live, totally different story, and like I said, I'll talk about them in a bit. I'm curious to know, in terms of like cover art, anything jump out at you?
Honestly, not really. It's just something that when you're like a digital person, you just don't appreciate it. And I know, like, we have friends that are huge vinyl nuts. I'm thinking of Pad, and I'm thinking of Glenn, and just you get to really appreciate cover art so much more when you have that big ass album right in front of you. I mean, even CDs, you don't get like that, the same, experience. So I can't say that there's anything that particularly stood out. How about you? Just
a pair of album covers that I enjoyed, and I really don't have much else to say other than I like them. Hath, All That Was Promised. It was more of like a death metal band that I thought the album art really kind of fit the mood for the album. And a prog rock band, Moontooth. The album is called Phototroph. Very cool album. Kind of like a Moron Police, but just not as quirky, I guess. But same type of vein. Very cool album. Very cool artwork. But those are just 2. Another category we often talk about is best comeback album. I'll put it out there. I was shocked at how much I enjoyed the new Imminent Sonic Destruction album. I thought that album was very good. And every time I listened to it, I thought of Knops, because I feel like he probably just ate this album up. I'm not the biggest fan of the band, but I thought that for a band that hadn't released an album in a while, they did a really good job, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, this one, I don't know that I put a ton of thought into it, but there were some bands that popped up that that ended up on my list that I was a little bit surprised by, even though they were kind of in like the top 50 rather than the top 25. But I thought the new Megadeth album was their best album in a while. I really enjoyed. I'm sorry. I lost them on the list. Arch Enemy.
Yes.
That album was quite good. I think having Elisa do a little bit more cleans kind of added a little more depth to the album.
I totally agree with that.
And like I said, I thought the Battle Beast was quite an improvement over their previous album. If you want to count Star One as an improvement over Arion, you could say that. But a lot of my lists were either like first timers or repeat offenders in a good way. So yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that.
All right, I like it. I like it. The biggest. Well, let's do best concert.
Oh boy. I have to say it for me. I think it was Iron Maiden actually, which I saw with you. I just for whatever reason, and it might have just been that guy just smoking an awful lot of pot in front of us. I just was having so much fun and just like banging my head and just like I just sitting there and just the being in that like dead center, like just watching everything. Like I just man, it was just so much fun. Like I just had such a blast and I would say that was probably the most fun that I had. I'm like, even though Prague Power was in June, it's like it feels like it was forever ago. I almost have to pull up the list of bands that played just to kind of to jog my memory. It's starting to come back to me now. I will say, and I know I've mentioned this before, but shout out to Milton. His day 2 of Prague Power this year was probably the most fun I had. Just seeing a slew of bands start to finish. Spectra, Will to Run, Seven Spires, Pain of Salvation, Stradivarius. I never left the floor. I don't even think I sat down, which is tough to do. I was 2 days before turning 40. But man, I had just the perfect buzz. The bands were great. Stradivarius just kicked ass with this old school set, which I think Rhapsody did something very similar to close out the festival. So also Conception was out of this world as well, and I really should mention that as well.
All of that was great. The irony for me is, as much as I kind of crapped on the Porcupine Tree album, they put on the best show I saw all year. I saw them at Radio City Music Hall. They played for like 3 hours. They played the entire new album, but they didn't play it straight through. They kind of interspersed all the songs throughout a greatest hits set list. And it was just so well done. And I kind of knew that I was in for something special when the show started. I hadn't seen the set list, and I kind of thought that they might play the entire new album, and I was a little concerned. And the first song they played was Blackest Eyes, which is kind of one of their classics off In Absentia, going back almost 25 years. But like when they opened with that song, I said, oh, we're in for something special, because it was just not expecting them to open up with one of these classic songs that I loved, that I've loved for decades now. And the whole show was awesome. They played 1 or 2 songs that I never expected them to play live. So they would play greatest hits. They'd play some of the deeper cuts that fans like me just absolutely went bananas for. And in a perfect venue, right? Like Radio City, one of the most iconic venues, in front of 6,000 people, and Porcupine Tree just absolutely tore the place up. It was phenomenal. And I'll tell you this, Steven Wilson, for all his quirks, was always kind of like not the most endearing personality.
Douche. The word you're looking for is douche.
Yes, that is the word. But that's the irony. At this particular show, and from what I understand, this version of Steven Wilson is like a new man. He was telling jokes. He was jovial. He wasn't taking himself too seriously. And it was like really refreshing for me. The whole thing was perfect. It was my concert of the year. And you probably mentioned concerts 2 through 7, because everything you mentioned was also awesome.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about just how great Conception was, and finally getting to see Roy Khan live and just the whole experience. And for a band that, like, I don't think they play a ton of shows live, and they weren't a band for 20 something years. They were unbelievably tight. I mean, that was a really impressive performance. So definitely wanted to mention that. But I think I would definitely say Iron Maiden was the most fun I had all year at a show.
What about your biggest surprise album?
I probably also would give that to Nocturna, just because the band didn't exist prior to this year. So like that, I don't know. Are you talking about more of like an established band that was a surprise, or like
However you want to interpret it?
Yeah, I was surprised that an acoustic Sonata Arctica album made it into my top 25.
There
That
you
was
go.
a very pleasant surprise, I thought. I guess just in a more general sense, to kind of repeat what I said before, I was surprised that so many first time albums or first, debut albums were in the top 25. I think that really bodes well for just the future of metal, especially in that symphonic genre that I so much enjoy. Yeah, a lot of most of the stuff that ended up in my top 10 wasn't terribly surprising. Kiss and Dynamite was a pleasant surprise being as high on the list for me. They were a lovely surprise addition to now a band that I'm going to be paying very close attention to going forward.
Nice. For me, it has to be Electric Callboy, just because I couldn't believe how much I loved it, and that was definitely a surprise. And as I mentioned earlier, the Coheed and Cambria was fantastic as well, and just I never expected to put them as high as I would. Best cover song,
Oh, that is
and I got to be honest, I don't have an answer for this. I'm not sure that there was one that potentially jumped out. I thought Seven Kingdoms did a couple of really cool covers, so I wanted to. I'll mention them. But other than that, I don't know that I really have one.
you know what? I'll say this. Tommy Johansson from Sabaton / Majestica really upped his YouTube game in 2022, and he did a crap ton of covers, and I absolutely loved his version of Elton John's "I'm Still Standing."
That was cool. Yeah.
Just hearing a power metal version of one of my favorite kind of like pop rock kind of songs was really cool. He did a ton of like Disney version of Sabaton songs, and he did Basket Case by Green Day and a lot of interesting covers. But that was the one that really stuck out to me. And yeah, like you mentioned, Seven Kingdoms, they were on my list at number 34. I think Zenith is their best album yet. I feel like this band just gets better and better, and they did a really great cover of Joan Jett's "I Hate Myself for Loving You," and they always do a good cover. I mean, they did a great version of Barracuda. They do a great cover of "The Boys of Summer," which they perform live. I'm glad that they're going to get to play at Prague Power, and I look forward to seeing them on that big center stage. So those are just a couple, but it wasn't a super strong year for covers, I would say.
My best cover this year was still my best cover from last year, and that's Lorde doing the Iron Maiden better than Iron Maiden. So I'll say that. I'll go back to that.
Lorde makes the list after not releasing anything the whole year. That's impressive.
Right. Congratulations. Talk to me about best EP, because I had two that jumped out at me. I'll mention them briefly. The first is a band out of Houston, Texas called Anova Skyway. They came out with an EP called Reset. Phenomenal. Prog kind of rock, a little bit of alt rock thrown in, a little bit of metal thrown in. Really, really good. I think they have a bright future. And another band called Egress, Egres, EP called Introspection. I'm not even going to say anything. Just go check it out.
I listened to both of those EPs on your recommendation, and I enjoyed both of them quite a bit. I'm going to throw this one out, though, to my main guys in Power Glove. They released a short EP called Flawless Victory, and for no other reason than having a cover of Big Blue from F-Zero, which is one of the greatest video game songs ever. Worth it just for that. But I'll also throw a shout out to my friends Ash and Brad Dendera, Edison from Dendera. They released a live EP, Blood Red Sky, live in Europe. So I want to
listen to that a lot.
Yeah, so mention them as well, because good stuff.
As we wind this down, your most anticipated release for this year?
Oh boy, it's hard to say because I'm shocked at the sheer number of albums that I'm already excited about. I'm kind of hoping Beast in Black releases an album this year, even though there's been no indication that they will. It's it's probably Delane's Dark Waters, just because from what I've heard so far, it's been really good, and just kind of this. It almost feels like Martijn is kind of throwing back to the early first two album days of Delane with a fresh new voice, and some of the older band members. Marco Hietala is going to make an appearance on the album, so that's definitely on my list. Followed closely by Twilight Force, Ad Infinitum, and Beyond the Black. All albums I'm really excited for.
I think the Delane is a great choice. My answer, or at least when I kind of had this written out, was Lord of the Lost, and then those jerks put the album out in December, so it took the wind out of my sails.
So now it's Camelot for you.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Right. That's exactly what it is. No, actually, kidding aside, the Camelot single is a lot better than people are giving it credit for. It kind of dropped earlier today.
Well, that would involve people actually giving it any credit.
Well, that's also fair. Who is your MVP of this year?
It didn't dawn on me until I was actually reading over the list, but I got to give it to my main man and the Kiss Steel and Ronnie Atkins, because between his solo album coming in at number 15 and Nordic Union coming in at number 11, I think he had the best collective performance on my list. So I'll give it to Ronnie.
I think he would be honorable mention for me. I have to go with Thomas Sakinen. I mean, the guy puts out a great Wolfhard album. He puts out Dawn of Solace. He's in Before the Dawn, which didn't come out with anything new, but I love them. He gets it. He was in my number one album of the year. He put out two fantastic albums, so I'll give him the nod.
Hey, you know what? Something I was a little surprised that didn't make your top 25, but I'm willing to bet it's in your top 50. Where did you have Wilderun?
Oh, I had that just out. Where did I have that? I have that at 33.
I had it at 31.
Okay, there you go. I thought that album, you want to talk about dense. I mean, that might be the densest of all the dense albums.
It helped that it came out really early in the year, because it almost felt like, when I went back and listened to it again recently, it almost felt like it was older than an album that came out in 2022, and maybe because
like January or February release.
Maybe because we saw it perform live, or maybe some of the singles had come out in 2021, so maybe that's part of it. But I felt like I listened to it more than almost anything else last year. So, but they're definitely a band to keep an eye on, and they were outstanding live.
Yeah, and that's not accessible to prog, so I'm almost surprised that you liked them as much as you did. We talked about the best non-album single, and I guess let's wrap up.
Did you choose one? I don't.
Oh yeah, I mean, Power Quest. Now is the time. There's no question about that.
Yeah, there was a couple other ones I wanted to mention. Voyager had that song "Dreamer" that they submitted to Eurovision, which I thought was really good. That'd probably be my number 2, and I think it was only one of 2 songs that Voyager released in 2022. Xandria released a couple of singles. It sounds like they're kind of hoping to make a comeback. I thought both tracks were really strong. Reborn and You Will Never Be Our God. I don't know if those will end up on a full-length album, but as of right now, I believe they're only singles. And what else did I want to mention? Serenity had a really good track, In the Name of Scotland, that was not on any album. And one other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was so crazy, before all the sadness with Taylor Hawkins passing away, Dave Grohl released this track called March of the Insane under the band name Dream Widow, and it should make some people in metal nervous if he decides that he ever wants to get involved in metal, because the guy definitely has chops. This was a wild, fast-paced, heavy-ass track that was like really caught me off guard, but it was really quite good. So definitely worth mentioning. But Power Quest is definitely my choice, of course.
So some good honorable mentions. That Dave Grohl track was definitely something else. And then I guess my last question, and I'll be honest, I don't really have an answer to this. Best guest spot.
Oh, good. That's a good one. It'll probably be Britney on the star one. I know I mentioned it earlier, but I just the way that there's something about all three star one albums. How the first two albums had like an intro track, which I don't think the third one did. But that first full length song on all three of those albums is such a just out of this world. I almost would call it, even though like we consider RN to be more prog, they're almost like power metal type songs. This was no exception, and it just kicks the album off with such a powerful way. And she is just such a force, and I just look forward to any time I get to see her perform because she's so good. But that would be my my definite, at least the most memorable to me.
Nice. Like I said, I don't have one, but I can certainly see why. And I think that kind of puts a bow on 2022. As we record this in the middle of January, I don't have any albums really in my top 50 for 2023. So I guess we're off to a bit of a slow start. Although I think a bunch of albums are coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, we might tomorrow. It might be another story.
We might tomorrow. So be that as it may. That brings us to finally next week. And I had an album picked out. I was all set to go with it. I even listened to it once because I figured let me just get a bit of a head start. And then we found out about the unfortunate and untimely passing of Jeff Beck, who is a absolute guitar legend. And quite frankly, I was doing a little bit of research as I saw all these tributes by different artists, from everybody from Paul McCartney to Motorhead. I mean, everyone had nothing but great things to say about this guy. And I realized I don't know that I'm terribly familiar with much of his work. And so I kind of went through the discography a bit, and I said to myself, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do something a bit different next week. We're going to do the Yardbirds' Roger the Engineer album, which was kind of his first full-length foray into obviously music with the Yardbirds. It would be the only album he would record with them, but it would be before he kind of hit it big with some of his other solo material and some of the other projects that he would work on. So let's do something different next week. Let's do a little bit of a tribute, if you will, to the late great Jeff Beck, and let's listen to Roger the Engineer going back to 1966.
Excellent. I am painfully just unaware of so much or I just know more than I think I do. But as far as like song titles go, I just I know what a legend he was, but I just Little Wing is the song that comes back to me because Pearl Jam's covered it so many times. But this is definitely, I think, going to be another one of those education episodes for me, which is
for me as well. And this is obviously, he gets credit because obviously this was, 60s, British rock, but at the same time, one of the first hard rock albums, maybe. I don't know. We'll make that determination next week. But I know that a lot of people kind of talk about this as the genesis of that 70s hard rock wave, even though it was 1966. So I thought, being that that he passed away, I thought it would be a fitting tribute and something a little bit different. And I'll kind of put what I had in store on ice for a little bit. I have a feeling it'll be timely at some other point later this year.
Being that I know what it is, I agree with you. But
I did give you a sneak peek earlier. I did run this one by you. So,
and it's something that I wanted to listen to anyway. So we'll definitely circle back to it later on.
I like it. So thanks for doing this. This was a ton of fun. I look forward to listening to the Yardbirds this week, and we'll continue as we march forward into 2023.
Yeah, these best of episodes are kind of like Christmas. Like I look forward to them so much, and then by the time they're over, it's like partial relief, but also partial kind of sadness that it's over. Because I think we do a really, really good job of not showing our cards to each other throughout the whole year, which I know it's hard to do because we talk to each other every day and we do this podcast every week. And so to keep that kind of stuff under wraps just kind of shows how much we enjoy surprising each other with, fresh information, I guess. So
I'm still shocked Evergrey made your top 50. So With that, enjoy the week, my friend. I will talk to you soon, and we'll come back to you next week.
All right, happy 2023. Time to start our next list.
Cheers.
Take care.